Guys, welcome to the Tierra Permaculture vlog. This is Otto. If you haven't met him yet, this is Otto. He's our garden cat. He does a lot of work for us to make sure we don't have any mice or rat population, but he also loves to hunt little lizards and everything, because we're in the tropics here, so we got a lot of little critters running around. All right, so we got some rain, a little bit of rain last night, so that's some good news. Less watering to do. And today we're going to be talking about the difference between compost and fertilizer. That's a common question when it comes to gardens and gardening, and today we're basically going to discuss that, and I'm going to try to convince y'all that compost is better than fertilizers. But in the end, I kind of leave it to you to decide what's better for you. So let's review it at the end. While we're talking, I'm going to be planting some cucumber starts in one of my gardens down here, so you'll get to just kind of watch that process. But first we got to do all the morning chores, and that starts with the chickens. All right, so I feed my chickens, in case you haven't seen it before, a rooster feed. Hi, bud. Hi, bud. Basically just high in protein, and yes, about, other little minerals and nutrients in there, but it's not like a mama feed, like a hen feed that's good for producing more eggs or anything like that with a lot of calcium in it. It's just a basic little feed, basically. Probably the most basic feed we can get. Lots of protein, encourages lots of growth. I supplement their diets with the extra calcium using their eggshells. So their eggshells just go right back to them. So instead of having to buy a feed that's really heavy in that. Oh, I'm sorry, Mama, I took your food. Mamas are very talkative in the morning, especially this one. So this is Katie's mama, and this is my mama. Katie's mama has some black on her tail, mine has some white. And our rooster, he's a very sweet guy, and he helps protect these two. Hi, Mama. How you doing? How you doing? So the rooster's making his little call, signaling to the ladies that there's some food here. That's kind of small little book, 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 book. That's his little call to say, hey, come here, there's food, there's food. The reason I want to start with the chickens, first of all, I need to do the chores. But also, it kind of begins our talk on fertilizer versus compost, or compost versus fertilizer. So it all starts with the manure. You can see down there, right underneath where they sleep, I get a nice little pile up of chicken manure, and that is one of the engines of fertility on my property. That chicken manure mixed with the bedding down there, mixed with all the bedding that I add into their upper part of their coop here. So those three things mixed together, plus bulk organic material that I get from my property, ends up starting a compost pile right here. This is where I usually start my compost piles. This is when they're really new, they're fresh. I pull all the bedding from up here, pull it all down, I pile it up, mix it up with all the manure, mix it up with all the weeds and everything, and bulk organic material I'm taking from my property, and this is where the pile starts. Once that pile has kind of begun to break down and starts to get active, I then move it down here. I'm going to flip you around. And it's underneath the tarp, so that gives a little bit more protection from the elements. When it's first starting, I don't mind a little bit of extra moisture, plus the shade cloth does keep most of that heavy rain off of it, so it doesn't get completely soaked. But once it kind of starts and gets going, I want to be kind of monitoring it a little bit more closely. So I start with that underneath this tarp here. But let's get you set up here so I can start talking at you. The compost is actually produced by my chickens. And I've talked about this in numerous other videos. I'll link one up here somewhere. But the compost is where it all starts for me. So what is compost? Compost is a mix of organic materials, generally some sort of mix of a high nitrogen material. Manure is what I'm using here, chicken manure. And I also actually mix in some horse manure from up the road. One of our kind of local community neighbors, they have horses there, and the manure just sits there. So I go with 5-gallon buckets with a shovel and collect the manure, and it's kind of a weird thing. I've never thought I'd be the guy really excited to find manure, to find poop from various animals and I'm like, ooh, look at that. Actually, one day we were walking down, and Katie was there, and I looked to the side and I saw a really nice fresh pile of horse manure, and then there's another pile really fresh right over there. I was like, oh, let me grab that real quick. She's like, absolutely not. You walk down, finish the walk with me, you can go back up and get it. So, you know, not all people are as excited about manure as I am, but back to this. The compost is basically a mix of some sort of high nitrogen material, some sort of high like green material, like this organic material that's really fresh. Fresh greens tends to have a carbon nitrogen ratio of 30:1, and that's kind of a pretty good starting point for pretty much all compost. That's what you're looking for. And then it also has, the compost that I'm building at least, has a high woody content as well. So the green material, the stuff that's really easy to break down, quick to break down, nice fresh plant material, this is food for bacteria. And the woody material in this compost, all the little wood shavings that I have up here, I also use coconut fibers because I have it here, because I have coconuts on the site. So as the husks break down, I just kind of slowly rip them apart, and they start to work themselves into this compost that the chickens scratch. This right here, and any woody material, wood chips if you have that at home, bedding material if you get manure with horse bedding plus manure, that's a lot of woody material within there. The woody material is the fungal network, the fungal food in the compost. So the compost is essentially a high nitrogen material, and that kind of gets the party started. It gets all the bacteria and the fungi wanting to reproduce a lot. The green material is basically a bacterial food, and then the brown material is a fungal food. You want bacteria and fungi to be fungi or fungi. Fungi is the dad joke, fungi, and fungi I think is more of the scientific way of saying it. But you want bacteria and fungi. That's essentially the basis of everything in the soil food web. So we'll talk definitely more about the soil food web in future vlog posts, but the soil food web is basically the life in the soil that makes all plant growth happen. Let's talk about that a little bit more once we start planting. But compost, this is compost. Compost is organic material that has been processed through biological activity to break down, and inside that compost there's high numbers of those organisms that are crucial to plant life and to soil life. The main ones being bacteria and fungi. They're the ones that are like the base of everything. And then all of the predators of bacteria and fungi, those are actually what's going to break down all the nutrients in their soil and make them plant available so the plants can take them up. It's the relationships between the plant roots and all the microbiota within your soil that actually feed the plants, not necessarily the fertilizers. Now let's get to that next. So based on what we talked about already, and a little bit I've kind of given you a preview for, I just want to ask you guys before I actually start talking about it, what is a fertilizer for your plants? What is a fertilizer? Let's think about that while we begin to discuss this topic. Fertilizer, in the general sense, is something that feeds the plant. So it's a compound that you add around your plants into your soil that helps feed the plant nutrients when it's lacking nutrients. All right, so right away, it's essentially like a holdover. Instead of having the nutrients directly from the soil, the fertilizer is actually just providing those nutrients. Oh, here you go, this is all you need. It's kind of like taking, if you're really tired, it's like taking one of those energy drinks, and you're like, all right, I'm just gonna have an energy drink and I'll keep going, and I'll have an energy drink and keep going, and oh, I need another one, I'm tired, I'll have an energy drink, I'll keep going. If you keep doing that and you don't sleep, you're never gonna actually not be tired. You're gonna constantly need that input, constant inputs to keep yourself awake in this example. It's very similar with fertilizers, at least with quick release fertilizers. So let's get to that in a minute. Otto the garden cat waiting for me down here. Hi. Hey bud. Cute. All right, so I got my cucumber starts here. And I know they're ready to transplant because they're starting to form their first true leaf here. So these are the seed leaves, these first ones here. This is what kind of comes up to start the photosynthetic process so that the plants can start growing roots and produce foods. And then once it produces that first leaf that looks like the leaf of a full adult plant, that's when you know it's ready to transplant. So you can either transplant them into the ground, or you can transplant them into a bigger pot so they have a little bit more room to grow if you're not quite ready to transplant them into the ground, or if you're just going to grow them in pots. This is a good sign. Once they have those first true leaves, so I don't know if you can see that well, put it closer to you. There's the two seed leaves up top, and then on the bottom there, that's the first true leaf. So that's how I know they're ready to plant, and I'm going to plant these guys around my trellis here. This was originally going to be a bean trellis, but the beans never took. They didn't come up. So I'm going to be using it for a cucumber trellis instead. Let's continue the discussion on fertilizers. So right now let's start with inorganic fertilizers. Inorganic fertilizers. What's that mean? Basically they're not inorganic, not from life, essentially. So these typically are mined in some form, and they're some sort of mineral nutrient. And most of the time they're actually produced in some sort of chemical factory, or they're mined from the ground. So an example is called gypsum. Gypsum's a pretty common, what some people would call fertilizer, other people would call a soil amendment, right? Gypsum is calcium sulfate, okay? And sulfate itself alone is actually used as a fungicide. It's used to add to the soil to kill fungi, or bad fungi. No, to kill bad fungi in the ground that you don't necessarily want. But fungicides don't just target one fungus. It targets all of them. So the fungicide, adding something that is it's adding calcium to soil, sure, but then the sulfate part of it being a fungicide, maybe not the best thing. There's a lot of things like calcium sulfate, potassium sulfate, all these different things that are claiming to be inorganic fertilizers actually are being added to your soil and likely are hurting your fungus population. And that might not seem like a big deal to you, but the more you learn, the more I can help you guys understand the soil food web, the more you'll realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe I don't want to be killing the life in my soil. Another thing about inorganic fertilizers is they're salts. They're salts. All soluble nutrients. So inorganic fertilizers are basically soluble nutrients. So when you pour them onto the ground or you apply them to the ground and water hits, that water is going to take them up and put them into the soil, and then the plants are going to be able to take them up because they're water soluble and they can take that water. Well, what happens when you add salt to water? Think about the ocean. Can you drink the water from the ocean? No, and that's because the salt binds with the water through the natural chemical processes, and because of that, it basically the water becomes unavailable. So if you drink salt water, that doesn't give you anything, and in fact, it's really toxic for you, right? Same exact thing with inorganic fertilizers. They're all salts. All soluble nutrient that you're being sold as an inorganic fertilizer is a salt. And when you add salt to your soil, it essentially makes water unavailable to plants. And the little bit of soluble nutrient that does actually find the plant root and gets taken up is quickly taken up and used, and then the rest of it is going to leach away. Because when it does bind to that water, the salt will bind to the water like we were talking about. Once it binds to that water, it's stuck there, and anything that's excess is just going to wash away with the rest of the water in your system there. So nutrient leaching is a pretty big problem. It can cause a lot of problems downstream in your watershed. Huge, this is like the algal blooms that happen at the base of the Mississippi River, all these major problems that are coming about because of all these soluble inorganic fertilizers that are being added into the plains. And we're kind of starting to see the results of that. I mean, we have been seeing results of it for a long time, but the results are starting to be noticed, I should say, now, these days. So yeah, just start thinking about that. Do you really want to be adding salt to your soil in order to give your plants a little bit of a boost? It's the same thing as that energy drink, right? You're really tired. What's the best thing to do? Yeah, if you absolutely need to keep going, absolutely do your little energy drink. Keep moving. Personally, I don't like energy drinks. I think they're pretty toxic for me. It just make me crazy. But people who live on energy drinks, like, more power to you, but likely you would choose sleep over an energy drink, right? You're pretty much taking the energy drink because you have to, because you're overworked and you're overtired. I bet 9 times out of 10 you would say, if you're given the option between, I'm going to take a nap, a nice deep nap, or a really long sleep, or having this energy drink, you're probably going to take that sleep, right? That's because it actually helps you. It's the same exact kind of principles when we're talking about these inorganic fertilizers. When you're adding those to your garden, you're giving your garden a quick little boost, a quick little, this is what I need. Some people argue that it's a good thing in some circumstances, right? If you're doing, say, like a hydroponic system, and, well, actually not really in a hydroponic system, but in some cases, let's just say there's a case where having that really quick soluble nutrient is a good thing. I mean, if it's going to save your crops from completely dying, maybe it is a good thing. But the reality is you're adding salt to your soil, and that's toxic to your soil. And once you start doing that, once you start down that road, you start killing off the soil life. And when you start killing off soil life, that's when you start having all the big problems. So what else do we want to mention about the fertilizers? So that's basically, I'm talking about inorganic fertilizers. Inorganic fertilizers mostly are mined. A lot of them actually come from petroleum or natural gas, especially the nitrogen ones. So when you're buying those, you're actually supporting the processing of those petroleum products in order to make those fertilizers. This whole kind of fertilizer revolution that kind of came about started right after World War II, when there was all this extra ammunition that they no longer needed. And in those ammunition, there's a lot of nitrogen. And so they're like, okay, what can we do with this nitrogen? Oh yeah, let's use it to grow food in this new industrial green revolution that's happening. If your camera's shaking a little bit, it's because Otto's on the chair that you're sitting on. Just be aware. So right after World War II, there's this huge amount of essentially inorganic fertilizer in the form of munitions, and they're like, what can we do with this? Let's start using it for food production, so we can grow lots and lots of corn and lots of soybeans. And again, I got nothing against corn or soybeans. I do have something against it if it's a big monoculture and it's being farmed using the conventional methods. That's just not good, in my opinion. But yeah, that's what we're kind of getting at here. The inorganic fertilizers generally not great for your soil. It's just not. Excess salts, not bonded, they're just going to leach. All those excess salts that we were talking about, anything that's not immediately used by those plant roots, they're going to be bonded to that water, just like salt water in the ocean, and it's just going to be leached, and it's not going to be usable. I'm going to move you because I think the sun's hitting right at your camera there. You might not be able to see. All right, hopefully this angle will be a little bit better and I won't be blinding you. So next thing, So just to kind of wrap up that inorganic nutrients discussion, they're essentially all soluble nutrients that are sold as inorganic fertilizers are salts. And the gist of it is salts are bad for your soil, specifically the soil life. They are fast acting, they're really quick, they're going to give that plant a boost. So if you have, if your livelihood, if you're a farmer and your livelihood absolutely depends on that crop producing and you're in dire straits, that might be a route you go, just because that's what you're looking at right there. But if you're really focused on the long term and what it's doing for what those salts are doing to your soil in the long term, if you want to produce on that piece of land for more than a few years without having to constantly buy those inorganic fertilizers, you may want to consider something else. Let's start talking about organic fertilizers now. Organic fertilizers, one of which is actually compost, is considered compost. But there are some not so great organic fertilizers. But let's just, before we even go any further, inorganic fertilizers, really fast release. It's basically right into the soil. Plants are going to take it up because it's immediately soluble. They're going to take it all up, but then whatever is left in the soil that they don't take up in that first little bout, that's going to get washed away. Organic fertilizers tend to be slow release. They're the ones you see on the shelves, and it says slow release organic fertilizer. That's because it's really just organic material. And over time, as the soil food web and all the microbiota within the soil start to break down that those fertilizers that you're adding, that's how they're going to be released into the soil. So there's a couple not so great ones, peat being the most common. Actually, it's one of the most common fertilizers or soil amendments used and sold out there. But my issue with peat, it's a great material, right? But my issue is it tends to be mining unsustainably peat bogs. Peat bogs are a resource that take a very long time to build up. And if we continue at the current rate of us mining those, we're not going to have any peat left for any of us to use. And it's destroying this really fragile ecosystem, these peat bogs that take so long to build up, that I just personally, I don't use peat because of that kind of unsustainable mining that's there. Just the more you know. Let's see, another one would be sewage sludge, actually. After they process all the wastewater treatments, often a byproduct is all this kind of organic material that was left in that. And they do tend to then either compost it or anaerobically digest it. And what results is they call it a fertilizer. Now, it is organic material, and I actually do advocate for using these materials within your systems, because it is a great reuse of something that otherwise would be a complete waste material that we might put in a landfill or something like that. But more often than not, what they're giving you is essentially the sewage sludge. It's likely been anaerobic at some point. It might have some questionable life growing in it. So what I actually recommend, if you can find kind of this sewage sludge, often your wastewater facilities will be selling it as compost or a fertilizer. What I recommend is take that and compost it. Take that and use it as a base material. It's like kind of your woody material of a compost. And then add some manure to get that kick started up, and add some nice fresh green materials, and maybe a little bit of woody materials with that as well, just to add a little bit of diversity. But I personally, that's just me personally, buying directly from a wastewater plant and then putting that on my soil, that's just a little questionable to me. And they've done all the tests to say it's okay to put on your soil and everything. It's not going to necessarily have any pathogens that are going to cause any problems, but it could, right? So the nice thing is that's usually really cheap or free to get, and it is essentially a bunch of organic material. But I would take that organic material and then use it as the base material for a compost, and then use that compost on your garden, right? So organic fertilizers are essentially plant-based. There are some mineral-based that are mined that are a little bit less good, especially kind of fossilized guano. That's one of them that they use. Bat bat manure essentially that's been fossilized and is harvested from caves and such like that. But typically, if you're buying an organic fertilizer, it's going to be a little bit better. It's going to be a little bit better. It's going to be long-term blood meal. That's one of them that's used in a lot of things that are actually from slaughterhouses. Actually, a lot of material from slaughterhouses is repurposed as an organic fertilizer of some sort. And again, that's reusing an animal product in a way that's not going to a landfill. So generally, I'd be okay with that. But again, then you're supporting this industry of slaughterhouses where, again, I got nothing. I'm a vegetarian personally, okay? But I have nothing wrong with eating meat, especially if it's produced ethically and it's produced in a way that is beneficial to those animals. Like I have chickens right here, and we had 2 roosters that were excess of what we needed because we don't need more than 1 rooster in our small little backyard flock. So we actually did harvest those roosters and we use them for meat, and we have chickens and we use them for eggs. So I have nothing against eating meat, right? But typically slaughterhouses are going to be accepting from those big CAFOs, those big factory farms, and that I don't like to support so much. But again, that material could be going to a landfill, so if you can use it for your garden fertilizer, maybe that's okay for you. But all this being said, organic fertilizers also include, compost, right? And what is compost? We were just talking about that. It's essentially a large pile of organic material that has been started to be broken down, and it has all the beneficial microbes that your soil needs. At least high quality compost does. So why not just use compost instead of going and buying out all these fertilizers? The end goal, what's the end goal of adding a fertilizer? It's to feed your plant, right? How does your plant feed? The soil. The plant feeds from the soil. The soil is what feeds the plant. So inorganic fertilizers, when you're just pouring it in there, it's soluble nutrient. It can go right into the plant, but you're killing the soil while you're feeding the plant. With compost, what you're doing is you're adding all those beneficial microbes to your soil that are then going to form those relationships with your plant roots that are then going to feed the plant. So instead of just doing a quick caffeine burst to keep yourself going, a quick little dump of inorganic fertilizers to keep your soil and your plants growing, why not focus on the soil? Yeah, it takes longer. Organic fertilizers are slow release. They're going to take much longer than, say, a quick burst of growth that you're going to see from an inorganic fertilizer. But the benefits of having that soil life far outweigh the costs of that inorganic fertilizer. So that's what I advocate for. You want to feed the soil, and if you feed the soil using organic fertilizers, in my opinion, the best one of those organic fertilizers is compost, or maybe a compost tea as a foliar spray. That's something that you spray on your plants to help protect the surfaces of your plants. Or perhaps a compost extract, which is essentially a compost put into a bag, into water, and then basically massage so that you take all those biota that's in that compost and you put them into the water. And then you can just dump that water right onto your soil, and that's going to take all that beneficial microbiology and just get it right into the root zone of your soil as that water moves through the pore spaces of your soil. So that's a much better way to add to your soil. You might not see immediate results, but more often than not, if you add compost and you add all those microbiology into your soil, you'll see results very quickly. I usually see results very quickly within a couple of days. Now, it might not be an obvious result. It might not be, oh, yeah, it looks so much greener and everything, but you'll probably see, oh, it's growing again. Oh, it's a little bit less stressed. And that's an immediate sign that you're doing something right. All right, guys, I don't want to be here for the last little thing. Just want to say thanks for watching the video on the difference between compost and fertilizers. Hope you've learned something. If you like what I'm doing, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and share with your community. That's the best thing you can possibly do for me, is share this video with any relevant communities that might actually get some benefit from this. I'm going to keep doing this as long as I possibly can. And the more subscribers and the more followers I can get here, the more reach I'll have, and the more potential I can actually do this full time. Oh, okay. So from Otto and I hope you guys have a great day, and thanks for watching.